behalf of the Cathaoirleach, I would like to welcome Joe and his guests to County Hall this afternoon for the launch of his new publication, Even the Heather Bled. This is the first event hosted in this chamber for some time, and while our arrangements are informed by health and safety guidelines, it is an honour for this council to host this launch for one of our foremost local historians and authors, Joe McGowan. In a tribute written over 10 years ago, a local journalist wrote, "If there is truth in the saying that a man in his life plays many parts, then this adage is surely epitomised by Sligo author and historian Joe McGowan. Farmer, soldier, builder, fisherman, writer." There are many facets to Joe's life and times, but this afternoon we focus on his exemplary contribution to our local history and heritage. Joe also has a storyteller's gift of capturing and retaining the listener's attention. He can relate tales of the ordinary and everyday with a sense of wonder that live long in the memory. Joe's fascinating insights, his interest in his subjects, his attention to detail combine to make him a master of his craft. Joe McGowan has been a great friend to Sligo County Council. Over the years, he has advised and supported us on many projects, including the National Famine Commemoration in 2019. In conclusion, we are delighted to host today's launch, and we look forward to working with Joe to promote this special publication to his loyal and expectant readership. Thank you.
Chief Executive Mr Tom Kilfeather, Councillors Bree and Gilroy, colleagues and distinguished guests. It is an honour to welcome Joe McGowan and his guests to County Hall for the launch of his latest publication, Even the Heather Bled. It is unfortunate that we are hosting this event under COVID restrictions. It is an occasion that deserves a higher profile and a greater attendance. However, we hope that by recording this launch, we will bring news of the superb book to a wider audience. Joe is one of our foremost historians and authors. He has made a major contribution to our knowledge and appreciation of local history, heritage, tradition and folklore. Starting in 1993 with the publication of In the Shadow of Binbulben, Joe has added hugely to our font of knowledge of our storied past, most recently in 2015 with the publication of Sligo Folk Tales. He has the innate gift of being able to capture the essence of a story and has recorded and documented countless invaluable memories that otherwise would be lost forever. Joe has dedicated much of his life to documenting and preserving our traditions and customs, many of which would have slipped through the mists of time without his painstaking research. In addition to his many notable publications, Joe was the driving force behind the famine memorials in Sligo town and the famine graveyard in Ballytivna. We are especially indebted to Joe for giving this council permission to republish his book on the famine to coincide with the National Famine Commemoration Ceremony. In conclusion, I want to thank Joe for permitting us to host this launch at our offices this afternoon, and on our behalf and on behalf of the elected members and staff, I wish him every success with his future endeavours. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank Sligo County Council for the invitation to the launch of Joe McGowan's new book titled Even the Heather Bled. I would also like to thank Joe for including some of my own research in the Civil War era in Sligo. I wish his new book every success. Mary Gilhawley was born in Screen in 1858. She married Henry Brenson of Ballysadare. They had 7 children, including Dominic and Harry. Both took an active part in the War of Independence and took the Republican side during the Civil War. This family research led me to the story of the death of Harry Benson and the deaths of the Noble Six. I started the research in January 2003. In the absence of a comprehensive account, I extended my research to include as many surviving oral history accounts as possible. I visited a large number of people and all were helpful in sharing their story. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all who helped in the research. Out of this research, 2 theme words come through: photographs and silence. Old and faded photographs of young men who died during the Civil War. One of the first given to me was that of Joseph Banks lying on the mortuary slab. It was the first of a number of powerful reminders that all who died in the Civil War were real people. The word silence I most associate with listening to the descendants of participants in the war and how they never or rarely spoke of that time. It was a short and brutal war. Dreadful events happened on both sides. The grandson of Paddy Callahan tells a story. When clearing out an old family house, he found a stone under some shoes in a press. He asked his granny about the stone. She started to cry and left the room. He later found out that the stone was found under Paddy's head when his body was found after the Rockwood ambush. The family kept the stone. For those involved, family relations were sundered. The military action stopped after 11 months, and then, to use a Yeats line, the peace came dropping slow. It was a peace that came in silence. The generation of the Civil War, the choice of the generation by the generation on either side of the war was silence. A community process coming from the view that dreadful things had happened, and the better option was to ensure that the bitterness was not transmitted to future generations. What can we of this generation say today when the generation that fought the war, like the mortal casualties of the war, are all now returned to the earth? We can hardly look over these silent graves with our humanity untouched and our voices also silent. We cannot undo the past, nor are we responsible for the actions of an earlier generation. But in reflecting on this episode of our history, we can choose how we remember the deaths. All who died as a direct consequence of the Civil War are as real as we are today. Each death was a tragic loss for family, for community, for country. For all of time, these untimely deaths make a demand on our capacity for courage and for generosity. And so it passes to each generation to solemnly and formally acknowledge all the Civil War deaths. In remembering death, we acknowledge life. For most of those who died during the Civil War, before they were divided, they were united in the War of Independence. They were among the best of their generation. Together they had answered the call of the proclamation of 1916. Together they had proven themselves worthy of the august destiny to which they were called. So may this be the memory of our Civil War dead we honour and cherish. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman of the County Council, Councillor Taylor, CEO of Sligo County Council, Mr. Kilfeather, Councillors Bree and Councillors Gilroy, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, it is a great honour and privilege for me to be here today on this auspicious occasion, the launch of Joe McGowan's book, Even the Heather Bled. I have very many happy memories as a councillor in Sligo County Council, sitting around debating the issues of the day. And as I came into the chamber this afternoon, Councillor Bree assured me that the one unanimous decision that they have passed recently is that COVID does not exist inside in this chamber. So you can all take off your masks now. But on a very serious note, it is a great pleasure personally for me to be here at the launch of this book. Joe McGowan has been mentioned already, is the author of many books. I think in total you have written 10 books, Joe, am I right? He also is a historian of great renown, both nationally and particularly here in Sligo. And this book tackles an issue which has been of great interest to the people of Sligo for the last 99 years. Precisely what did happen on the top of Benbulben on that Wednesday day, on the 20th of September 1922. It's a topic that is obviously close to many people's hearts and no more close than to my own, as my grandfather was one of the people involved in that issue. Joe has done enormous research in compiling this book. And for those of you who haven't read it, I'll just give you a very short synopsis. He starts with the history of the Irish nation at the time of Strongbow and takes us through the following 800-900 years where we suffered oppression by the English. We fought against them, then we were oppressed again, we fought again, but consequently we arrived at 1916 as a status of a part of the United Kingdom. We then had the Easter Rising, followed shortly afterwards by the War of Independence. And unfortunately then we had the Civil War. And as you all know, we're not a very big country, and in the Civil War, literally brother fought against brother, sister against sister, fathers and mothers against their children. And that was really emphasised here in Sligo by the MacNeill family. You had Brian MacNeill taking the Republican side in the Civil War. You had his father, Owen MacNeill, who was the commander of the Irish Free State Army, and his two brothers who took the Free State's side. And I know, having spoken to some of their descendants, it is an issue that has bedevilled them and has bedevilled many families down through the years. We're now 99 years on from those dreadful times, and I really want to commend both Joe and particularly Des for the research he has done in putting to bed finally what happened up on Benbulben Mountain 99 years ago. He has forensically looked at all of the issues. He has put forward various hypotheses, and then by dint of strong argument has diminished and defeated each hypothesis. And there is only one hypothesis that stands. And that's why I would encourage every one of you and encourage your friends to go out and get this book, read it through. It is a fascinating account, and I think it will stand not just for the next 20, 30, 40 years, but as one of the seminal books in local history as to what particularly happened up on the mountain in Benbulben. I think there's great credit due to both gentlemen, and particularly to you, Joe, as well, for compiling the whole book, for thinking it up. And if you think about the title, Even the Heather Bled, just think about that for a moment. Benbulben is full of heather. There was blood on Benbulben that day, and it symbolised in many ways the blood that was all over Ireland because of the Civil War. One of the good things is that for the last 98 years, we haven't been fighting among ourselves in the Republic. I know there have been fights in the northern part of the country, but hopefully they will be resolved very shortly. But all of us who have a direct involvement in the Civil War have actually got on very well together. And I think that's a great tribute to the men and women who gave their lives on that fateful day. So finally, could I just congratulate Des and particularly Joe for a great book, a great read, and I would heartily commend it to everybody. Gur míle maith.
I'm very pleased to have finished the book and grateful to Sligo County Council's support of the launch under the guiding hands of Communications Officer Kevin Culreevy and County Manager Tom Kilfeather. The incident on the mountain has been part of my psyche since my earliest memories. It was always there, known and yet unknown, like a dark shadow, seen and unseen, half understood. There was always a mystery surrounding the event, overall an abiding sense of sadness for Sligo's sons. The ballad written at the time, Sligo's Noble Six, immortalised the incident and was sung at gatherings in rambling houses around the fireside in the decades following. All true men of this Irish nation who follow the tricolour fold come and join in sincere lamentation and pray for the true and the bold. It is but a pitiful story, unequalled in bloodshed and tears. As bright as the stars in their glory shine the names of our dead volunteers. Then pray for Banks, Carroll and Langan, MacNeill, Benson, Devons, TD, 6 hearts that were true to old Ireland and died that their land might be free. Sorry, I can't sing it. Maybe later on. My father was a volunteer from 1913 to when he was released from Tintown in the Curragh at the end of the Civil War following a 3-week hunger strike, November 1923. He never spoke to me of his experiences and how I wish now that he had. However, I was very privileged to have spent many a winter night with Willie Devons of Ohiged Grange. He was at the retrieval of the bodies from the mountain. Research for this book has led me to meet very many men and women too, whose fathers were involved, and mothers, during the War of Independence and the Civil War. I am grateful to them for sharing what they know, and grateful too for their support and sponsorship. No image exists of the burning of the Ballinallee armoured car at Carnamada, so I enlisted the help of local artist Anna McGowan, who has done a fine job of recreating the scene for the front cover. Joe McGowan came on board too to recreate Listlaheli and the Scanlon House as it was back then. 4 of those killed left from a dugout behind the Scanlon House. Since there are no images of what the dugout hiding place used by volunteers during the War of Independence and Civil War was like, Joe has done a fantastic job of recreating this for us too, and it's in the book. Several years ago, I had a most fortuitous meeting with Des Gilhawley, who was doing extensive research on the Civil War in Sligo and on the incident on the mountain in particular. Deciding to team up, we made several trips up the mountain to where the incidents happened and spoke with many North Sligo residents who were connected in one way or another to the Civil War. After many conversations with Des, it fell to me to write the book. The title of the book was inspired by a young poet, Charlie Donnelly, who remarked, "Even the olives are bleeding," shortly before he died fighting for the Republic at the Battle of Jarama in February 1937 in our Civil War, particularly with the men known as Sligo's Noble Six. It could equally be said that in our mountains, the Heather Bled. To explain the historical context, the story begins with the invasion by Strongbow's forces in August 1170. It tracks Ireland's crucible of conquest, colonisation and survival from that Norman invasion to the birth pains of the Irish nation in the 20th century. Penal times, the Great Hunger of Black 47, David and the Land League, the Celtic Renaissance, the Easter Rising, War of Independence, Civil War and Sligo's part in that journey are all covered in the book. In Sligo and elsewhere, when the Civil War was over, things had to be patched up with neighbours that had taken different sides. In the words of Ernie O'Malley, comrades who had withstood the jail war parted to take up the threads of inscrutable destiny, some to begin life all over again. Thanks everybody for your attention.
Thank you, everyone. I think that concludes the formal proceedings. I want to thank James and Marty especially for their help in the recording of this today. Because of the COVID guidelines, we'd love to have more people here today to mark the launch of Joe's book, but there's going to be a permanent record there, obviously, and I'm sure people will enjoy it.
I'll begin with a clip from a poem by W.B. Yeats titled The Second Coming. It's very descriptive of the period. Turning and turning in the widened gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Before I started writing the book, I had to put myself back into the mindset of the people of 1922. Having grown up through the 40s and 50s in a small farm in Mullaghmore, County Sligo, it wasn't difficult for me. Things hadn't changed much on small farms from 1920s to the 40s and 50s. A sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air that heinous Wednesday morning of September 20th, 1922. Black plumes of vapour, one after another, had rolled sullenly across the face of Binbulben all morning. There was an ominous calm. Day had dawned bleak and wet, as had many another, but this one somehow was different. It was unnaturally still, people remembered afterwards, both hill and valley shrouded eerily in mist and fog. For days the sodden clouds had obstinately hidden the hills and valleys, blanketed the boglands, swelled the little silver streams to self-important wee prattling rivers. It saturated the few ill-clad farmers clamping turf on the Glengalla and Clonurco bogs. By contrast, the heather's vivid purple, its colours presciently funereal, but nevertheless joyful now in the rain, adorned hill and bog, lit the turf-brown shadows, lightened the gloom. It was mid-harvest, and despite bad weather, the crops, turf, hay, potatoes, all must be saved. There was no alternative, no assistance from the state, and meagre income from subsistence holdings. In the small farms of Grange, Ballintrellick, Ballymote or Easky, shortening days and waning sun lent urgency to their preparations. Men hurried about digging potatoes, harvesting grain crops, laying foundations for the hayreeks, cutting rushes to thatch them, twisting straw ropes on starry moonlit nights to secure them. Sure, there was a civil war going on, and the sounds of conflict like distant thunder could sometimes be heard from afar. Just yesterday an armoured car under hot pursuit had been destroyed by armed men over there at Carnamada, the occupants narrowly escaping death or capture. Troop movements on the Sligo to Bundoran Road were worrying. Only recently there was a pitched battle at Rahelly, but the harvesting must go on. On farms where the men of the house were on the run, sleeping in safe houses, dugouts and mountain caves, neighbours pitched in to help. About noon on this darkest of days, the sound of artillery, machine gun and rifle fire reached a crescendo, the clamour of war seeming to come from the direction of Drumcliff in North Sligo. Men and women looked up from their work, blessed themselves and breathed a prayer. For surely men were going to die on this day that blind rage shattered the serenity of Binbulben's peaks and valleys, when Irishmen fought and killed brother Irishmen with a bitterness and cruelty unsurpassed even in the darkest days of the Black and Tan Terror. How did it come about then that good men could plumb such depths? To where should we retrace our steps to discover how Ireland's centuries-old fight for freedom could lead to such an impasse? To the cream of Ireland's manhood dying at the muzzle of former comrade's rifle on a lonely Sligo hillside. Should we go to the faithless, or hapless perhaps depending on which version you believe, dervelous, ill-fated elopement with the swaggering Diarmaid MacMurrocha in the 12th century, that fateful episode that had its tragic outcome in the introduction of the Norman hordes to Ireland? Should we go to the 16th century Battle of the Ella Ford maybe, or perhaps to the Battle of Kinsale that spelled the end of the old Gaelic order in Ireland? Defeats we had many. Battle of the Boyne, Rebellion of 1641, the pitch-capped Wexford rebels of 1798. Of victories we had a few. Battle of the Ella Ford, Battle of the Curlews, Battle of Benburb, War of Independence and more. I have a short clip here that was written by Stephen Gwynn. It begins, I call to your mind Red Hugh and the castle's broken word. I call to your mind O'Neill and the fight at the Yellow Ford, and the ships afloat on the main, bearing O'Donnell to Spain, for the flame of his quick and leaping soul to be quenched in a venomed bowl. And the shore by the Swilly's shadows and the earls pushed out through the foam, and O'Neill in his grave clothes lying, with the wish of his heart in Ireland and his body cold in Rome. Let's look then at the torturous crucible that forged a modern Ireland. And so on, the next 300 pages go to answer that question.